Hey guys, how you doing? Just wanted to get started with the student ministry project, and you're going to find in my post that I took a very different stance when it comes to youth ministry. After viewing the divided video, um, I became very burdened when it comes to youth ministry or student ministry. And hearing several of the pastors speak, um, I began praying about it. And when I began praying about it, I felt led by the Lord to actually go in and look at the scriptures when it comes to student ministry and then looking at the biblical model. Well, when you look at the biblical model, you can clearly see the fact that students or youth in the church, in the earlier church, they were not separated from the congregation. And in the video, Paul Washer and Voddie Baucham talked very extensively about the fact that this is something that was not even used in the biblical model to separating the children from the parents or the congregation. And in fact, where it really started, Voddie Baucham talked about the fact that it really started in England in the 1800s, and it started as a result of the fact of children, factory workers, who had no education, and at that time, the church reached out to them to start an education program for them. And so, as a result of that, the church just adopted it into their practice. And they pretty much institutionalized it, and they started doing Sunday school. But in the Sunday school, one of their biggest concerns was the fact that they were concerned that it was going to stop the parents from discipling the children. And so here we are in the 21st century now, and we've got the problem with the parents not discipling the children, as it's fallen on the youth ministers and the volunteer workers that's actually working in the church. And then you will also see in my post that I talked about 77 to 88% of students are falling away from their faith because they're not, something is clearly not working. And as a result of it, more and more students they're growing up in the church, but then when they leave the church, they don't hold to their faith. And so if you look at Deuteronomy 18 through 19, it clearly says, "You shall lay these words of mine in your heart, and you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise." And then we also find in Ephesians, it says, "Children, obey your parents." In 1 Peter 5:5, it says, "Likewise, younger people, submit to your elders. Yes, all of you be submit to one another, and clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Here we have clear evidence where the Lord is telling the parents, teach your children the word of God, so they will follow it day and night. Tell them this day and night. And then we find in the New Testament that the children were being addressed in the church community when the apostles were speaking. And it's very clear that we can see that in the scriptures. But yet in the Sunday school and student ministry in the 21st century, we're not doing that because of the fact of what was instituted in England. And then it came over into the Americas, and then as a result of it, it became institutionalized in the church. And one of the things that I found when I was doing my interviews with the parents and the students, I found that the parents, every single parent that I interviewed, They said to me, I want my youth minister to disciple my children so that they will follow the Lord. Well, if you look at the biblical model, it's not the church's responsibility, it's the parents. And in my introduction on the forum with the essay, both Bachman and Washer state the fact that the youth ministry cannot be reformed as some people want to reform it, because the fact that it cannot be reformed is the fact that there's no biblical roots for it to be reformed. And so as a result of that, we've got a problem. And then when I interviewed Trey from Ebenezer Baptist, one of the things that he talked about quite frequently and what his typical week was like and how he planned everything was his main concern was making sure that he was making the time to disciple the youth along with his leaders as well, because he said there's so much work to do when it comes to discipling the youth. But then once again, if we look back at the biblical model, we find that it really shouldn't have to fall on a youth minister and leaders for this to happen, that it really should be falling on the responsibility of the parents, that the parents should be doing it at home. But the fact remains that we live in the 21st century and there are so many families falling apart, and there's no support in the family. Whereas there's a lot of divorce, single mothers, that kind of thing. And then in even some regular marriages that are together, the parents just check out. Even the fathers, they don't want to take the responsibility. They don't see that as their responsibility. But that's one of the things that Trey told me. He said it's a big problem. And as a result of it, a lot of the youth are, they're struggling with these things. And then also in the paper, I also interviewed Trey once again when it come to a youth event, as I was not able to get out and actually be a part of a youth event myself because our church was having a COVID outbreak and I really didn't want to risk it. And so what I did was I actually interviewed him when putting together a youth event and what it entails in putting together a youth event. And he made it very clear to me that when you're putting together a youth event, it takes a lot of timing and a lot of planning. And he planned this one particular event in months in advance. And it was because of the fact that Wes Henderson's homecoming got canceled because of COVID. And so as a result of that, they did an event at launch. And they went over the day that they were doing the event, and they went over to the high school, and they'd announced it to the football players at several months in advance. And the day of the game, they went over and they took them Chick-fil-A before the day of the game, and then they left at halftime and left and went over to launch. And so when they got over to launch, the football team came over around 10 o'clock and they got everybody checked in, and then they let them go free with games and stuff like that. Then around 1 o'clock, they had pizza and games and stuff like that. And then at 4 o'clock, they actually had a message that came out of Psalms 32. And when they were sharing the message, 8 of the youth actually got saved and 4 entered into believers' baptism, which was a result of the event, which I thought was amazing, considering the fact that it was a lockdown and and so many of them accepted Christ, which is great. But Trey said the result of the event being so successful was the fact that it was good planning, but it was not only good planning, but it was a youth event that was planned with purpose. And the purpose was to minister the gospel to the students. And as a result, several got saved. And then for me, when it comes to what I learned in this process, I learned that, well, number one, that the student in the student ministries, they don't need to be separated from the congregation according to the biblical model. And if it's going to change, then we have really got to humble ourselves and look and see what the biblical model says. But we live in the 21st century, and the 21st century is different. But the Bible transcends all centuries. And so the Word of God says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God to give to all men liberally and without reproach. And it also says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if we got a problem with youth falling away from their faith, maybe we really should humble ourselves and go back and look at the Word of God and completely do it different. I know many of you may disagree with me on this, but if we look at the Word of God, we do not see where the youth are separated in the church. In the church, they are in unification because God is all about unity, and they were never separated. And so as a result of that, that's why we've got the problem that we do. And a lot of kids are going to these big youth events, and they're going for a big time. A lot of them are, as a lot of them aren't planned with good purpose. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some churches that's doing a great job with youth ministry and stuff like that, but still yet, even the good ones say a lot of the kids fall away from their faith. And I know this because I was one of them. And I got to honestly say, if my parents would have sat down with me, was in our household, and taught me the Word, I don't think I would have fallen away from my faith. I really don't, because I would have seen it in the fact that my mom and dad valued the Word that much to the point to where they wanted to teach me the Word of God. Not just some youth minister teaching it to me, but my mom and dad wanted to teach me. Now, my mom and dad were very strong Christians, but they did not disciple me. And if they would have discipled me, I truly feel that it would have been different. So as a result of that, that's where I stand. And when it comes to would I go into youth ministry now? Do I feel that I have enough skills to be able to do it? Well, I used to work in the student ministry at my previous church, and I taught children from 3rd grade through 5th grade, and I really enjoyed it. But even then, I saw the ones that struggled, and it was always the ones that didn't have the strong discipline and in the family. But as a result of that, I think I could go into youth ministry if the Lord called me to it. But I would have to be very prayerful about it, considering what I have learned in this class and watching the divided video, and also doing my own research and studying it according to the scriptures. So that's where I stand on that. I know there may be a lot of you that don't support my opinion, but if we look at the biblical model and we follow the biblical model, then we know that the Word of God will work. But I say that with a heavy heart because of the fact that we've always done it with youth ministry, but yet at the same time, we've got a serious problem in the 21st century, and a lot of youth are falling away. Thanks, guys.